Telesur English present a new episode of China Now, a Media's production that showcases the culture, technology, and politics of the Asian giant. In the first segment, we are going to start with the U.S. intelligence lying to the U.S. Congress boosted by China. Also, a member of Japanese World War II confessed to war crimes, and presidency of the Council of the European Union visit Beijing, and much more. Let's see.
China Current is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started.
Welcome to China Current, your weekly news report on what's happening in China. I'm Lisa. In this episode, U.S. intelligence lies to U.S. Congress busted by China. Member of Japanese World War II bioweapon unit confesses to war crimes. Presidency of the Council of the European Union visited Beijing. Chinese and Russian Navy fleets conducted joint training in the Western Pacific Ocean. Chinese and UAE Air Forces conducted joint training in Xinjiang. China has become Israel's #1 supplier of automobiles. Let's start with the CIA secret misinformation campaign revealed by China. On the 10th of July, China's National Cybersecurity Department exposed a propaganda campaign staged by the U.S. intelligence service. The United States Intelligence Service even recruited a hacker army specifically for China. Between February and April of 2024, a hacker group called Volt Typhoon came into the spotlight through extensive reporting by Western media outlets. According to the U.S. official statement, it was a Chinese government-backed cyber attack group targeting U.S. servers and home routers, posing a great threat to U.S. national security. However, there seemed to be a lack of consensus on the severity of these threats. The Western media and various factions within the U.S. government hold different opinions on the scale of the alleged danger posed by these so-called Chinese hackers. As early as the 31st of January of this year, the U.S. Department of Justice claimed to have removed a malicious program from hundreds of routers, selling it as a major victory in the confrontation with Chinese hackers, only to be negated 3 months later by the FBI director, who publicly warned against the infiltration of many U.S. critical infrastructures by the Chinese hacking organization. He said the Chinese were waiting for the right moment to strike a devastating blow. However, Reuters reports, which came out 2 months later, was only able to confirm a limited number of hacks by the Volt Typhoon hacker group. U.S. media outlet and officials successfully persuaded the Congress to extend Section 702 of the U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Section 702 allows the U.S. intelligence agencies to collect the phone calls, emails, text messages, and other communications of almost any non-American located outside of the U.S. without a warrant. Although the U.S. government states that this warrantless surveillance can only be targeted at non-Americans abroad, Americans' community are inevitably captured too. The reason is simple. U.S. citizens who talk to families, friends, and colleagues who are located abroad also meet these conditions. According to the Association of American Residents Overseas, as of 2022, there were 5.1 million U.S. citizens living abroad. The background of the Section 702 can be traced back to the 9/11 terrorist attack that happened in 2001. President George W. Bush discovered that counter-terrorist wiretapping operations required procedural approvals, and he felt the process was not fast enough in emergency situations. Consequently, he mandated that wiretapping could be conducted without a warrant, allowing intelligence agencies to act immediately with presidential authorization. And this laid the foundation for what would become Section 702. This measure was initially highly secretive. However, in 2005, As the US forces invaded Iraq, these unlawful procedures were exposed. This revelation sparked significant opposition from the American public, who argued it violated citizens' right to privacy. As a result, in 2008, the US government officially legalized this emergency wiretapping by enacting Section 702. However, the legal validity of the provision was originally set to expire in 2024. As it faced heavy scrutiny in 2013 as Edward Snowden exposed the PRISM program, and later as Julian Assange exposure of civilian casualties by the US military in Baghdad. These incidents heightened public awareness of the importance of privacy rights and transparency. Therefore, to persuade Congress to extend Section 702, a compelling threat must be presented. Therefore, the U.S. intelligence agency launched the Volt Typhoon program to scare U.S. voters and legislators by falsely claiming that Chinese hackers had attacked the U.S. and succeeded in prolonging their legal authority to spy on the U.S. citizens. According to an investigation by a technical team from China's National Cybersecurity Department, this political propaganda program was actually implemented as early as 2023. From January to May last year, the primary mission of U.S. intelligence agencies was to fabricate a cyber attack by a hacker group allegedly supported by the Chinese government. Then, from June 2023 to January 2024, their focus shifted to securing increased funding for the 2025 fiscal year. During this time, several U.S. companies fueled speculations about Volt Typhoon, perpetuating the China threat narrative. While the initial objective of the Volt Typhoon program were achieved, the extension of Section 702 authorization extended only until 19th of April this year, that's 2024. But on that very same day, the US Senate passed the extension of Section 702 by a vote of 60 to 34, just before this deadline. Over the next 2 years, the U.S. intelligence agencies not only retained their powers and secured higher budget, but also expanded the scope of their surveillance operations. As the U.S. continues to claim cyber attacks originated from China, China's network have faced significant assaults. Statistics from China's National Computer Virus Emergency Response Center, the National Engineering Laboratory of Computer Virus Prevention, and the 360 Digital Security Group revealed that from May 2023 to the present, over 45 million cyber attack campaigns have been launched by hacker group, which ties to US government agencies. These attacks targeted Chinese government entities, universities, research institutions, enterprises, and infrastructure such as hospitals. The computer virus samples found in the system of these victims pointed to the US CIA, the NSA, and the FBI, among other agencies. China's official statements pointed out that Section 702 is an important legal basis for the US government to build a hacker empire around the world. All countries that respect the privacy of their citizens should be vigilant about this. While the US government haven't apologized for Section 702 yet, there are people in Japan who have the courage to stand up and apologize for the historical crime of Unit 731. On the 5th of July, a former member of the Japanese German Warfare Army Unit 731, Hideo Shimizu, announced plans to visit China in August to apologize for his role in the unit's notorious human experiment during World War II. In March 1945, when he was only 14 years old, the Japanese army conscripted him to the Unit 731 headquarters near Harbin in China. He remained there until Japan's unconditional surrender a few months later. At a recent press conference in Japan, Shimizu recalled the horrific scenes he witnessed at Unit 731. He witnessed various human specimens, such as pregnant women and babies soaked in formalin. Shimizu said, "I just couldn't understand why we did cruel things like that." During World War II, Unit 731 committed a series of human experiments on Chinese civilians. At its peak, the unit has 63 detachments. Historical records clearly documented 1,549 victims, and this number continues to rise as scholars conduct further research. Chinese scholars have found that, in addition to Chinese civilians, the victim also included Indonesians and Filipinos. The Japanese Empire established another biowarfare unit in Southeast Asia called Unit 9420, with branches in Malaysia, Indonesia, Burma, and the Philippines. In Malaysia, Unit 9420 occupied hospitals to breed plague rats and use prisoners for biological weapon tests. This Japanese veteran who dared to reveal the truth won't be in China until August, but the EU leader has already arrived in Beijing. On the 8th of July, Chinese President Xi Jinping met with the rotating president of the European Union, Viktor Orban, in Beijing. During the meeting, Orban expressed concerns about the conflict in Ukraine. President Xi reiterated that China has been actively promoting peace talks in its own way and encourages and supports all efforts conducive to the peace resolution of the crisis. Meanwhile, the United States has voiced concerns about Orban's self-styled Ukraine peace mission, especially his meeting with Putin and Xi. U.S. National Security spokesman John Kirby said, "It certainly doesn't seem to be productive in terms of trying to get things done in Ukraine and trying to move forward to achieve this peace that President Zelensky continues to work hard for, and that we continue to try to operationalize." This statement came 5 days after the Biden administration announced additional security assistance for Ukraine, including assault weapons donated by EU members such as Germany, Romania, and the Netherlands. Next up, on the 10th of July, China's aircraft carrier fleet launched its first far-sea exercise of the year in the West Pacific alongside a joint maritime patrol with the Russian Navy. Amid the US-led RIMPAC 2024 exercise, heightened tension in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea, the Chinese Navy aircraft carrier Shandong, accompanied by multiple missile destroyers, was observed in the Philippine Sea on Tuesday. Russian news agency TASS reported on the 4th of July that the Russian and Chinese Navy have teamed up in the Asia-Pacific, marking the fourth joint maritime patrol since 2021, aimed at enhancing naval cooperation and regional stability. The joint group is set to conduct anti-submarine and Air Force defense drill and practice search and rescue measures at sea. Moving on the 11th of July, the opening ceremony for the Falcon Shield 2024 Joint Air Force training exercise between China and the UAE took place in China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The joint training is set to continue until late July. The commanders of both sides met on the 23rd of April to promote closer Air Force cooperation, notably after Washington's hesitance to provide Abu Dhabi with advanced fighter jets. The UAE brought 12 Chinese L-15 trainer jets in 2023, gradually replacing its Western military hardware with Chinese alternatives. Last but not least, Chinese cars have dominated Israel's auto market for the first half of 2024. Recent data from the Israel Vehicle Importers Association revealed that Chinese automakers sold over 34,000 vehicles from January to June, surpassing South Korean and Japanese brands. Chinese electrical vehicles in particular have dominated Israel's EV market, with an impressive 68.31% market share. Leading the charge is BYD, which emerged as the top Chinese brand and saw a total of 10,178 orders. Analysts anticipated that this trend will continue, reinforcing China's position as a pivotal player in the global auto industry. And that is all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts or comments about our show, please reach us at the email address below. Look forward to hearing from you and see you next time.
We will go for a short break, but we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to China Now. In this second segment, we have overlap with Larry Johnson, former CIA intel analyst, and Shen Yi, professor of international politics at Fudan University, talking about different topics. Also, Global Arena with Jeffrey Shah's economist, professor and director of Sustainable Development Center at Columbia University, talking about how well Hungarian Prime Minister is doing in the peace mission over the Russia, Ukraine, NATO, and US situation.
Did you get a chance to watch the debate Thursday night between Joe Biden and Donald Trump?
Of course, I watched the whole debate for that 90 minutes.
Okay. Were you scared to death, or what? What was your reaction?
I laughed to death.
Hello, welcome to Overlap, brought to you by Wave Media. I'm Larry Johnson, and I have the honor and privilege today of conversing with Professor Shen Yi. Let me start off by asking about your background, because it is, I think, important for me to know your experience and why you speak English so well.
My background is very simple. I continued my studies in China, and in 1995, I entered Fudan University, and I studied international relations. After 10 years, I graduated with my PhD grade in Fudan University, and then stay at that university to become the faculty there. And my research focusing on international relations in general ways, and especially focusing on Sino-US relationships. My PhD thesis focusing on cybersecurity, the cybersecurity strategies of the United States is my PhD thesis. And after that, my research focusing on global cyberspace governance and so on. I spent 1 year postdoctoral research fellow in Georgetown University, studying at their School of Foreign Affairs and the program of science, technology, and international relations and so on. So beside my research, my teaching in Fudan University, I also participated in policy research focusing on the US and China relations and writing some papers for newspapers here. And of course, to discuss Sino-US relationships, those important development in the social media represented by the Weibo in China side, and doing some video podcast in the Bilibili. It's a video platforms in China.
Okay, fascinating. For your information, my background, I was working on a PhD. I never did finish my dissertation. I was too lazy. I joined the Central Intelligence Agency in 1985 in an analyst track after spent the first year in what they call the career trainee program. That was to introduce us to all 4 directorates of the CIA. But then I started my career as the analyst for Honduras, and then later became the senior analyst for regional analyst for Central America. And this was during the wars in Central America between the Nicaraguans and the United States, Sandinista War, the wars in Salvador and Guatemala. In 1989, I left the CIA, moved to State Department, and worked in the Office of Counterterrorism. That was a 4-year experience. I then left there in 1993, 94, and started working doing consulting. And my consulting business entailed two main focus. One was on scripting terrorism exercises for U.S. military special operations forces. The other focus was me and my partners, we did international money laundering investigations. So, for example, we came up with the novel idea of doing a racketeering case against the major tobacco and liquor companies because they were involved with money laundering. They were actively working with drug cartels. So our client, one of the clients was the European Union. And so Philip Morris settled with them for $1.5 billion. I think it was 2003. Sounds like a lot of money, but turns out that was about a week of cash flow for Philip Morris. So, but they were actively engaged. I have become a political commentator by virtue of my experience, acquired knowledge of both how the intelligence community works, particularly the CIA, both in operations and on the analytical side. I dealt with policy from the State Department standpoint, but was directly involved with transportation security, as well as international criminal investigations, the investigation of the bombing of Pan Am 103. So in a way, I bring a unique perspective because I see how the entire machine is put together. And it's not very pretty, but it's something that the average American, and I think actually the average person around the world, they really don't understand. They always make some assumptions that there is an intelligence force. And when I say intelligence, I mean somebody who's smart, who's coordinating, who knows what they're doing. And I maintain that, no, I've never seen that government. If that exists, I would like to see it. When you were in Georgetown, did you live in DC proper, or did you live in Maryland or Virginia? Because people who've never been to Washington, D.C., they think, oh, George, it's just all one lump. And from your own experience, it's different.
I lived in dormitory in Marion. There's a shuttle bus, the Georgetown, they have this cycle shuttle bus. So this shuttle bus will carry me from Georgetown to the dormitory where I lived. It's in Fort Mayer, military base there. In the Saturday or Sundays, you can hearing that they have their drill, the cannons, some sounds like boom, boom. They will make that test or exercise in Sunday or Saturday sometimes.
I guess if you really wanted to get some exercise, you could have walked from the DoubleTree, across the bridge, then climbed the extra. Did you ever climb the Exorcist stairs?
Yeah, I just climbed there sometimes, but it's a little bit tough for me that time. I'm a little bit lazy. I prefer to enjoy my times, casual times.
What was the biggest both surprise and or disappointment for you in coming to the United States? Here's where I'm going with this question. I maintain that one of the biggest problems we face with international relations, and this goes to the cognitive issues, people don't understand the societies and cultures in which others live. And they form ideas that are not necessarily correct or not necessarily well informed. What was your sort of surprise about the United States, or disappointment, or either?
In the year 2008 and 2009, United States, I experienced my lives in Georgetown, and sometimes I participated in the faculty discussion or conference with the U.S. professors. And I go to the Congress to participate several hearings, to sit there as an audience to hear about the question and answers. Generally speaking, at that time, United States did not disappoint me. At that time, United States is quite familiar, like what I learned from the newspapers or textbooks or on the films or the TVs or the videos. That's the United States I already learned. But what surprised me very deeply is one thing happened about 2 or 3 years ago. I participated in a video conference. It's a conference is focusing on Sino-US relationships, geopolitical security, and so on. And during that conference, I made an argument to say that nowadays to China, we feel a little bit frustrated because the US government did not obey the guidance produced by Dr. Kissinger's and Brzezinski's on lots of issues. But when US professor told me at that conference, he said that they are not Americans, they are Europeans. I was, what? I feel a little bit surprising. He said that real United States peoples, those American peoples, did not think the thing in that way. So I think that's the shocking times. It's like a wake-up call that remind me that there's maybe I have some misunderstanding, or at least the United States now is quite different comparing with the United States I remember I have in my brains. So I think that's the time that I find out it's important to have better understanding of the real life and the real thinking of these normal American peoples, which will help me to make proper or better understanding on US policies, even though such kind of policy or strategies, just like you mentioned, is just a contradict to our framework to analysis U.S. Policy and strategies. Just like there's two United States in the world. One is the United States that lives in our mind. The other is the United States in the real world. Nowadays, I'm clearly find out we need to gap the difference between these two United States and to modification of analysis framework according to the real United States rather than a United States you thought to be.
Yeah, I've been stunned by the shift in both rhetoric, thought, and action in the United States from being favorably disposed towards China to now treating China as openly talking about China as an enemy. I cannot give you an explanation why in terms from the standpoint of the United States. It's not like China. It'd be one thing if you did to us what the Japanese did in 1941, if you attacked and blew up Pearl Harbor. I've always amused now that one of the issues is we can't let these Chinese come into America and buy up our farmland. But yet we want Americans to be able to go into places like China and buy up property there. That's okay. So it's the double standard that I see unfolding. But from your perspective, any understanding of why there's been this shift? What's driving this shift in the U.S. attitude?
You ask a very important questions. That's also the questions confuse China research and normal Chinese peoples very, very deeply in the last I think it's since the year 2017 or 2018. Just like suddenly in one night, we just shift completely different. From China's side, actually in Trump administrations, we develop explanations. We believe a lot of scholars and research believe such kind of change is an incident, which means because Trump is so different, he is abnormal. So when he was removed from the White House, everything will change back. We will say that the Sino-US relationship, we wish it will go back to its normal track. When we talking about this, it's like we have imaginations that China and the US, their relationship have a kind of normal track. But with the astonish or attack of the stupid policies of Trump's administrations, we just leave that track. When Trump leave this office, and then our car will go back to that track. But actually, it don't happen. Biden just continue lots of these policies. And I think what stimulates China most is the rhetoric changes. It's more and more clearly that the United States use those very weird ideological terms to describe China, like name China like communist China, talk about the so-called communist parties. It's just to create a new image of China, just like suddenly United States find that China is red. But actually, this CPC is founding these countries in 1949, and we already developed on our diplomatic relationships for more than 40 years since the late of the 1970s. And we cannot understand why. We try to finding out some optional explanations. Maybe the United States, their governments, those political elites, they develop some rhetoric framework, try to explain to the normal US peoples why they face some problems. And this problems is produced by China, not by United States. And then by such kind of framework, they need to create an enemy. They need to transfer China from a kind of friendly, cooperative partners into a horrified, terrible enemies in the general ways. That confused Chinese peoples a lot. Just you mentioned, from China's side, we feel very, very weird. We did not doing those enemy-like behaviors or policies toward the United States. In quite a long time during China's open up and reform process, we believe that the United States, as a good tutor, as a good teachers, we need to learn from the United States. I think you must remember Mr. Yang Jiechi when he and Wang Yi met Sullivan and Blinken in Alaska in when Biden took his office, during that negotiations, the Yang Jiechi say that, in Chinese, he said that 我们把你想得太好了. They say that we take too much good considerations from your side. We always take a good perceptions of your behaviors, and we tolerate you too much. We have too much expectation from your side. It's very highly symbolic moment of Sino-US relationships. From then on, China take a much more practical attitude to rebuild our perceptions toward the United States. And nowadays, China tried to take practical ways, which means we are focusing more on interest. And of course, we still have some considerations. We wish we can manage our conflict and dispute between us. And we can manage some middle or low level cooperations when necessary. And generally speaking, China we don't have this interest to have a direct conflict and a confrontation with the United States. And we still wish, try to providing some good signals which prove that good willness. We're still looking for the potential and the possible cooperations from the United States. But frankly speaking, we got more and more disappointed. We did not got positive feedback from US side.
Right. I think I'm quite a bit older than you because I remember 1972. So I was just coming out of high school. And that's when Nixon goes to China and opens up the relationship with China, and ultimately culminates with the United States recognizing the one China policy. Now, why did we do that? Well, the manipulations of Kissinger and Nixon, and then it was maintained by their successors, was to make sure that China and Russia never got together. That we kept you two apart. Even though you're neighbors, we don't want you to be friends, which is a very sort of cynical policy approach from the standpoint of the United States. And yet, in tandem with that, it then opened up this, the investment that was flowing into China, and the number of U.S. companies that started building both factories and establishing businesses. And yet throughout this, the way I've seen the rhetoric, the public commentary shift, particularly over the last 6 years, and I think it started before Trump, is China is being described as an imperial power. And the point I always bring up, I'm going, give me the list of countries that China's invaded. Give me the list of those countries where China has launched military attacks without any necessary provocation over the last 30 years, 40 years. And yet, here's the United States with, you need a big sheet of paper, lots of room to write out the country. You go, okay, yeah, it's Iraq twice, Syria, Afghanistan, Panama, Grenada, Libya, and it goes down the list. Do the Chinese view the United States as a threat to international order, given our record?
And I think that as a research on international relations, I can understand why some people inside the United States would prefer to name China as an imperialism or an imperialist countries or empire. Because according to the so-called international relations, the realism relations, Hans Morgenthau, in his very famous book, The War and Politics Among Great Powers, he defined that there are two different countries. One country named the status quo powers. These status quo powers, they prefer to keep these orders. And the other countries, he named it revisionist or imperialism or imperialist state, which means these countries, the development of these countries will changing the orders. So according to this theory, you will find that all developing countries in today's world, they are imperialist state because they all want to change the orders produced and created by the Western countries. From China's side, yes, we have different understandings or different images of the United States. In quite a long time, frankly speaking, especially after the beginning of open up and reform policies, we tried to take a more practical attitude toward the United States. First, we did not agree all US policies. We named US policy, especially those action and behaviors to invade other countries in the name of, we blame the United States in the name of hegemonies. Hegemony is a negative term in Chinese cultural background. Second, in quite a long times, we try to keep a balance to deal with our relationship with the United States. Sometimes we even accept the asymmetric positions between our bilateral relations, which means in lots of times China make a compromise to ensure that Sino and US relationships can ensure in a quite stable and peaceful tracks. And third, according to Chinese understanding, we believe these bilateral relationships, especially US-China relationships in the period of first 10 years of the end of Cold War, should be development in such kind of ways that United States and China develop their bilateral relationships mainly based on the guiding principles of so-called comparative advantages, in which means when United States enjoyed advantages on the capital and innovations, and China enjoyed advantages, comparative advantages on the industry, the labor forces, the human resources, then United States and China can launch lots of effective cooperations, very widely spread from the trade, investment, technical innovations, and even in the lots of fields of global, so-called global governance. Such kind of cooperations may be that equal. Maybe United States enjoy more advantages, but China and maybe the world can get benefits from such kind of bilateral relationships. So from China's side, we feel a little bit confused, sometimes frustrated. It seems that just in one night, United States suddenly changed all its policy and strategies to China. So to China's side, we believe we already sending our goodwillness by using a very benign rhetoric to describe United States behavior and policy and strategies in the world since we improve our relationship in the early of 1970s. Nowadays, China still try to avoid use those very traditional Cold War style rhetoric to describe United States or to simply define the United States as kind of threat to the world. We try to focus on detailed policies and the detailed strategies so that the main purpose is we want to take a quite responsible attitude to dealing with these bilateral relationships, which we believe is the most important bilateral relationships towards stability, peace, and development, not in today, but in the foreseeable future.
I very much support what Prime Minister Viktor Orban is doing. I know him well, and I know him personally, and he is very bright, very smart, and understands very clearly the real situation in his neighborhood, in his part of the world. He is trying to make peace. Yeah, he knows that the U.S. push to enlarge NATO to Ukraine is the root of this war, because Russia said, do not come to our border. That's the message from Russia to the U.S. government. It has said that for 30 years. Do not put your missile systems and your military bases on our border, because that is a national security threat. But the U.S. would not listen to Russia. And it's not only the expansion of NATO that Russia regards as threatening. The United States unilaterally abandoned the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002 and began to place missile systems in Poland and Romania, very close to Russia's borders, in the 2010s, and Russia strongly objected to that. The United States also supported insurgencies that were threatening Russia's security. because the U.S. often funds insurgencies or guerrilla forces using the CIA and other operations, and Russia knows that this is yet another threat to its national security. Moreover, the U.S. participated in a violent coup that overthrew Ukraine's president, Viktor Yanukovych, in February 2014, and that was the start of this war. The U.S. behaved very irresponsibly in participating in the violent overthrow of a Ukrainian government that wanted neutrality. It did so because the U.S. is opposing neutrality. It's pushing NATO membership for Ukraine. So when the president of Ukraine wanted neutrality as opposed to NATO membership, the U.S. viewed that president, Yanukovych, as an obstacle. Viktor Orban understands all of this. I had a long discussion with him on these issues also in Budapest, and I was very, very impressed by his clarity of understanding, his knowledge of the deep history, and the practical pathways to peace. Now, what Viktor Orban is saying runs against the U.S. neoconservatives, because the neoconservatives want U.S. hegemony. Viktor Orban wants peace. He wants security for Ukraine, but based on neutrality, not on NATO enlargement. And of course, he is correct. Right now, his words will not be well received in Washington by the neoconservatives, but what he is doing is opening up the truth for the public. And NATO itself is somewhat divided because most countries follow the U.S. lead, but Orban is not alone. The government of Slovakia, for example, led by Prime Minister Robert Fico, also strongly opposes this war and NATO enlargement and strongly calls for a negotiated solution. I believe the truth will eventually prevail, but right now the neoconservatives don't want truth, they want NATO expansion. Now when it comes to Europe, most of Europe sides with the United States because they are part of a political system that the U.S. helped to create, because they have found over the years that if they oppose the U.S. has ways to interfere in the politics of many of the countries of Europe. The U.S. invests a lot of money in keeping its allies in power. There have been cases, even in Europe, where the United States used covert means to topple governments that it found unhelpful to the U.S. cause. There have been secret operations led by the intelligence services in Europe that have been aligned with the CIA. Something called Operation Gladio is an example of that, though that goes back a few decades. The Europeans, by and large, side with the United States. They also feel the U.S. is their only nuclear umbrella, so-called. In other words, a nuclear deterrent, because these are not nuclear powers in general. But I think that they miss the main point, which is that a more cooperative, much less aggressive NATO policy would make the European countries far more secure and would make Ukraine secure, because this US-led hegemonic approach, in other words, trying to dominate, is only creating bigger and bigger risks in Europe itself. Interestingly, when President Putin was asked in his interview with Tucker Carlson, why does Germany go along so much with the US? President Putin's response was, he didn't know. Now, he's very clever. He understands a lot of European and US politics, but he also could not fully account for the fact that the European countries just have quietly gone along more or less with the US position, other than the exceptional cases, notably of Hungary and of Slovakia.
And this was another episode of China Now, a show that opens a window to the present and the future of the Asian giant. Hope you enjoy it. See you next time.